at Georgie's Restaurant. From road to the White House, it's about 40 minutes.
Welcome to my place.
Well, it's a delight to be here, man.
And I promise I will help you a lot.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
4,000 Bosnian people is here in this community.
That's what I understand. As you know, I spent a lot of time in Bosnia.
Very nice people.
A lot of time.
Good Americans.
Yeah.
And
a magnificently beautiful country.
Yes, it is.
If you have ever been to Bosnia-Herzegovina, you fly over. I've flown the length and breadth of it 7-8 times in a helicopter at about 200 feet. It is absolutely breathtakingly magnificent. From Brčko all the way down to Split. I mean, and everything in between.
1993, 1994.
See, I learned to swear in Bosnia.
You learned to swear in Bosnia? I learned to get shot at in Bosnia.
Ja ima veliki kurac.
Hey man, Bob, good to see you again.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Hi, how are you?
This is Anessa.
We met before. It's hard to forget those eyes. Look at those eyes.
Yeah.
Look at them.
She just was the queen of the...
That is not surprising.
Isn't it true?
That is not surprising. What are you doing now, kiddo? You're still in school?
No, I just got out of school. I'm about to start working for Bankers Company. And
Well,
then
great. Good for you.
Another
3 years she got her degree.
Oh, that's what confused me, because when I met you before.
Yeah.
And I thought you still had more time in school.
No.
Yeah, well, you made it out, huh?
Yes, I did.
Oh, wonderful.
She's one of our steering committee. So
Well, that's great. Thank you. Hi, how are you, man? Nice to see you. Hey, buddy. Hey, folks. Let me say something about the owner. You know, folks, I spent a lot of time. There's no reason why you would know this. I spent a lot of time back in the late 80s and early 90s going to one of the most beautiful, topographically most beautiful countries in the world that I've ever been. And because I've been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for so long, I've been in that committee, I've gotten to see the vast majority of the world. I have flown over Bosnia-Herzegovina. I have flown over it in a helicopter, literally no higher than 200 feet, because at the time I was flying, it's harder to shoot something down at 200 feet than it is to shoot something down at 1,000 feet for real, because you don't give as much of a profile. But you fly over that country from Split up to Brčko. You fly through it. It is absolutely magnificent. And what Slobodan Milosevic and his thugs did to literally get us involved, get engaged once again in the 20th century, Europe in genocide, was something that turned my stomach. And the only thing I'm going to say about this, and I didn't plan on saying this till it was referenced. I wrote a book recently. I had no intention of running for president when I signed up to write that book. As one of the interviewers in one of the national shows said, "Senator, it's obvious you weren't running when you decided to write this book, because you've said things in here you might regret having said." But I was honest in the book about, and I started writing this book about American foreign policy. And it started off to write the book about an encounter I had, which is one of the things that affected me a great deal, and it relates to today, with a guy named Slobodan Milosevic. I had gotten involved in the late 80s. Continuing to push the Bush administration then, Bush 1, and the Secretary of State then, Larry Eagleburger, saying that there was genocide going on in that part of Europe, in the Balkans. And no one wanted to listen to me. And I got an unusual phone call. I got a phone call from the ambassador from Yugoslavia at the time, Yugoslavia. I got the ambassador of Yugoslavia in Washington call me, asking me to go meet with Slobodan Milosevic, saying that I had it all wrong, that it wasn't anything to do with Slobodan Milosevic and the Serbs. They were doing nothing to the Croats, and they were doing nothing. And Tuđman was no box of chocolates, but who was the Croatian leader, and that this was all my imagination. Would I meet with him? And I said I would, but I sit in the chair that Arthur Vandenberg sat in, the leader during World War II, Republican leader, who in fact did not particularly like Franklin Roosevelt, but in fact reached across the table and joined arms with Roosevelt in the start of a bipartisan foreign policy in America. It was referred to by saying our debate should stop at the water's edge. We should be united abroad. And so I went over. But I thought the whole time about my dad. My dad was one of the guys who railed against the notion of abuse of power. My dad was a high school educated guy, an elegant, decent man, never went to college. I'm not making him out to be some great scholar. He was just the salt of the earth, a decent, decent man. But when we had dinner, dinner was the place where we sat to discuss things and occasionally eat, as opposed to sit down to eat and occasionally have a discussion. And my dad railed against this notion of abuse of power and used to talk about Hitler and how long we waited and what we should have done, etc. And as I flew over to meet with Milosevic in Belgrade, I said I would meet with him on one condition. It would not be in public, because I didn't want to give him the status of having a highly elected U.S. representative being seen shaking his hand in public to give him that credibility. So I met with him, which was they accepted my conditions at 10 o'clock at night in his office. And I sat at a table that was no wider than this is round, a conference table in his office, and began a discussion about what was happening in Srebrenica, where there was a massacre going on. And I was convinced of it. And he went on and on with all these maps about, no, it was the Bosniaks. They were shelling themselves to get sympathy from the world. It wasn't the JNA, the Serbian army. It was, in fact, and went on and on. Finally, at one point, he could tell I was disgusted with him. And he looked at me and he said, Senator, by the way, he had a PhD, spoke perfect English, and was a brilliant guy. Cool as a cucumber. He looked like a mafia don. This guy was very, very well dressed, very smart, and very under control. And he looked at me, Mr. Mayor, and he said, Senator, in perfect English, what do you think of me? And all I could think of was my dad. And I looked at him and I said, Mr. President, I think you're a damn war criminal. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career seeing that you are tried as one. So help me God. And there were witnesses with me at that time, two staffers, one of which is here. And he looked at me like most thugs do. And he looked at me as if I had said, lots of luck in your senior year. He did not move. And we went on. The generic point I want to make to you is this, folks. I had no intention of talking about this book, but I end this book with a chapter talking about my sixth trip from, I was a dozen trips into Bosnia, but my sixth or seventh trip coming back from Iraq. I leave from here to go to Iraq. I go from Sioux City to go to Iraq for my ninth trip into the region. And folks, look, one of the things I've learned is that as much as we don't like it, the fact of the matter is the rest of the world looks to us. I write about this in my book where I say at the end, I detoured from Baghdad and I took a government plane and I flew to Darfur. I landed in Chad, a God-forsaken piece of real estate. I mean, it is God-forsaken. I landed an air base and I got on a UN plane, a little, they call it a COD, because it opens up from the back like a C-130. It's a small plane. And we flew about 300 miles along the border in the desert, landed on a runway you could only be discerned by rocks that were laid out along this otherwise nondescript, there wasn't a twig growing anywhere. And I was going into a refugee camp with 30,000 women and children. And it was one of 8 refugee camps along that border. As I landed, we got out of the back of the plane. I had a pair of khaki pants on and a golf shirt type shirt. And as the dust settled, 2 young African aid workers, one extended his hand and he put his hand out and he said, Judy, thank you. Thank you, America. Thank you for coming. At that moment, I saw in that kid's eyes the same thing I'd seen in Srebrenica, the same thing I saw in Tuzla when they opened up the back of a of a dump truck and there was a suffocated child in the bottom. The same thing I saw in Birchville. The same thing I saw in bombed out cafes and going down on the 3rd floor underground of the newspaper in Sarajevo. I saw a look of fear, hope, and expectation. And expectation. The truth of the matter is that young aid worker would have not said that to any other representative in the world. Think about it. Had I been a German senator, a French senator, a Russian senator, no one would have extended their hand and said, thank you. Thank you, Russia. Thank you, France. Thank you, Germany, for coming. And that puts a pretty heavy burden on us. That doesn't mean we can solve all the world's problems. But I tell you what it does mean. When they lose that look in their eye about America, and it's not just the disadvantaged that feel that way, it's the advantaged feel that way, we have a problem. Because what has allowed us to lead the world and maintain our security has not merely been our military force. Our military force is absolutely necessary. I make no apologies for it being the most powerful force in the world, and it should remain the most powerful force. But it is not sufficient. It is not sufficient to be able to maintain peace and security for the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never been more isolated in the world than we are today. Never. Not once in our history. I say that as a practitioner and a student of history. There's not a single nation in the world, including Israel and England, close allies, that if the President of the United States walked in and said, this is what we must do, they would automatically look back and say, yes, sir. Folks, see this lovely lady? She's 51 years old. We marched in a Memorial Day parade. It was hot as hell. We were going about 20 miles an hour on foot across the bridge over here. I turn around to Gary and say, is Mom okay? And he said, yeah, she's ahead of you. She's right there. You are a trooper, Mom.
Well, I since have sprained my ankle, so I don't do quite as well.
You sprained your ankle? Well, no wonder. You walk too fast. Anyway, any questions anyone has, I'll be happy to try to answer them. What do you want me to do? Okay.
Joe, I was wondering,
Thanks, Paul.
is there any reason why this country couldn't use the troops in Germany or Japan to help out on National Guard?
Gentleman asked an important question. Is there any reason why, as it relates to Iraq, this country could not use the troops in Germany or Japan to give relief to the National Guard, which he didn't say the rest, which is considerably overstretched? And the answer is there is no reason and there is a reason. The no reason is physically we could do that. Practically, the hard part of doing that means that the concern is if you draw down too many troops in Europe, the concern is that the Europeans are going to say, keep them down, that this is the end, that we don't want you hanging out around here. And that's what the military concerns. The second concern is the type of troops. The type of troops we most need in Iraq are not in Germany. What we should be doing is drawing down troops in Iraq, taking them out of Iraq, instead of drawing down troops in other parts of the world, sending them to Iraq. What we should be doing is taking our troops and redefining their mission. Right now we have 166,000 troops that we're using in the midst of a civil war. We are having them go door to door in Baghdad, a city of 6.3 million people. They are in the midst of a war in Anbar province, choosing sides with the Sunnis, viewed as enemies of the Shia, etc. There should be only one purpose for the American troops to the extent they are there. And you don't need 166,000 for it. And that is, it should be for force protection. We have 4,000 civilians inside that green zone that have no protection, number one. Number two, it should be to train not the Iraqi police, but the Iraqi army. There is some movement going on to a multicultural army made up of all three factions. And they should be there for only the other purpose is deny al-Qaeda the occupation of large swaths of open territory in Anbar province. You need a lot closer to 50,000 troops than 166,000 troops to do that. And that's why back in January, Carl Levin, the senator from Michigan, and I introduced what everybody talks about these days, the Biden-Levin Amendment, saying begin immediately to draw down combat troops, have most of those combat troops out by March of '08, and limit the mission while you are moving toward an international political solution, getting this federal system set up. But the reason, and we could draw from Korea, the gentleman asked, and we could draw also from other places, but it really upsets the strategic balance of the United States forces as planned, and a lot of them, again, are not the right troops. They're not special forces, they're not striker brigades, etc. Yes?
I heard the president the other day say we have never lost a war. We won in Korea, we made Korea whole, the 37th parallel. And in Vietnam, we left and we made Vietnam whole. He said, of course, there were a few words like killing food, fields, old people, re-education.
Well, I find the president's recollection of history mildly...
Dave Letterman said the other night, the pictures of Vladimir Putin, bare-chested, he said, hell, our president appears in public without a brain.
Well, next question. How can I improve on that?
Why can't they stop taking money out of Social Security? They're always pulling it out for something. I think Ronald Reagan at the time, when he was president, he took it up to $88,000, the cap. The cap needs to be taken off that. These fat cats that make all this $100,000 and above don't pay any more Social Security.
You raised two questions. I'll answer them very quickly. Number one, we should not be raiding Social Security. Remember all that talk in the Gore-Bush campaign about a lockbox? The lockbox was the thing where he basically said, we're collecting, even now, a lot more money from those paying into Social Security than we're paying out in Social Security. At one point, it was about $1.2 trillion above what we were paying out, we were taking in. A lot of money. Now, what the president did was, and in fairness, even the Democratic administration did, Pat Moynihan and I had a bill. Remember Pat Moynihan, the senator from New York? Great guy. Moynihan and I, out of the Budget Committee, came up with a proposal that was law for a while, and then it got repealed, and that was that you had to have a separate, it had to be listed, I'm just going to sound like a policy wonk here, a separate budget recognition for Social Security. All the money in and out of Social Security had to be kept over here in this budget, and all the money spent and everything else had to be here. You couldn't combine them. So you could honestly know how much Social Security money was coming in, how much was going out, and how much was available in general funds to pay for Social Security indebtedness down the road. It's a lot easier for presidents to put them together. Why? Because it makes the deficit look lower. If I'm bringing in $800 million more in Social Security, and I'm paying all the Social Security because I got plenty to pay it on now, and over here I'm taking in $800 million less in taxes, and I'm really running a deficit of $800 million. If I combine the two, it looks like I'm even, right? Put them in the back. That's what we've done. It's wrong. We shouldn't be doing it that way. Second question relates to how do you fix Social Security? Anybody on Social Security now, through the year 2041, you got not a single solitary thing to worry about. But anybody after 2041, you're going to start to worry. Because that's the first time we start taking in less money than we are paying out. And there's one easy way to fix it. If you just raise the cap from 89, I think it is now.
I was close.
You're close. No, by the way, and you could be right. Your number could be right. Roughly $90,000 a year, let's say. If you raise that cap to say Social Security taxes come out of the first $119 million, you make it solvent for another 47 years. That's all you got to do. Now, so that the idea that it's not fixable, the hard part's Medicare. That's a bigger one. But anyway, I'm taking a lot of your time. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, what do you think of, and if you were in position, what would you do in the big problem we have with controlling our borders?
What do I think about the control of our borders? What would I do about it? Ladies and gentlemen, no great country can say it is secure without being able to control its borders, period. What I would do about it, or what I proposed to do about it almost 13 years ago. I would radically ramp up the number of border security guards we have, the use of electronic surveillance material we have to guard the border, and a number of what they call virtual fences. They're not literally fences, virtual fences from aerostat balloons on to whereby we could control the border. Much, much better. The reason the president didn't do it and vetoed the stuff at the front end, doubling the border patrol, it costs money. Same reason he cut the Biden crime bill, which eliminated the 100,000 cops program. Why did he do it? Not because it wasn't working, but because he wanted the money for tax cuts. You cannot provide $1.2 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy without raising the deficit even higher unless you cut other things. And you can't go out there and make hard choices. Case in point, the 9/11 Commission. By the way, I can hardly wait to debate Rudy Giuliani. I can hardly wait to debate Rudy Giuliani. He talks about security and terror. Rudy, I am looking forward to this. I'll tell you why. One example. The 9/11 Commission, smartest bipartisan bunch of people, hard, tough, right-wing guys, liberals, everybody across the board, all with real credentials on terror and national security. They met and they met and they met and they put together a report saying this is what we have to do to increase our security, not just our border in Mexico, but our border in the port of New York, the port of Newark, the port of Los Angeles, the Canadian border, etc. And they came up with a recommendation, a minimum requirement of $41 billion to be spent over 5 years. This administration has been criminally negligent in failing to implement any of those major recommendations. 7 million cargo containers come and land on our shore. Only 1% of them are inspected. 1%. I made a tour of the ports, starting in New York and ending up in Seattle, Washington, as a study. And one port in Seattle, the port director took me on to show me how lax the security was. Took me in, took me to a cargo container stack, clipped the door, put something in it, closed it, and then locked it up again. He said, you don't even have to import a dirty bomb. You want to transport a dirty bomb across the country, put it in one of these containers when it's here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's criminal what we're not doing. And how can we say that we're protecting the ports? How can we say we're protecting the country and the border? We are not spending the resources to do it. Last point I'll make on this. 30 major cities in America. We're approaching the second anniversary of Katrina. God forbid another Katrina or another attack like New York occurs in any of the other 28 cities in America, large cities. Not one of them is prepared. You know why? They still have no interoperability. You cannot have your local policeman speak with the National Guard. The National Guard is not able to communicate with the mayor. The mayor is not able to communicate with the state police, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know why? That cost $101 million. Over $100 million to do. Why? Because you need the bandwidth that you make it available to all those cities and states. We've refused to do that. Why? Because we don't want to offend the networks. We gave them analog and digital. They were supposed to give back the analog in 1998. They haven't given it back, and we don't want to offend them. Ladies and gentlemen, John McCain and I have been screaming about this for the last 2 years. My point is, we are woefully inadequately protected. And it's not Joe Biden. I know you think I might say that because I'm supposedly this expert on terror. Well, let me tell you something. It's not coming from me. Look at what you read in your paper. The National Intelligence Estimate. Hear me now? That is the compilation of the consensus of the 14 leading American intelligence communities, from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the CIA, etc. They said, what'd they say? Al-Qaeda has reconstituted itself. It is a greater danger to America today than it was before 9/11. We went, and it goes on and on. We have created more terrorists than we have destroyed or dissuaded. On September the 10th, 2001, you can go on my website, joebiden.com. I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking. I made a speech to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And in that speech, I predicted that there'd be a massive attack on the United States of America. And I said it would come in the belly of a plane. I did not say it would come. And the point of my speech was I was taking on the President of the United States' misappropriation and misapplication of American tax money. He was spending and committing to spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. The least likely threat America faces is an ICBM missile carrying a thermonuclear warhead traveling 18,000 miles through the stratosphere, aimed at the United States with a return address on it. That is the least likely threat. And I laid out in stark detail, I'm not making this up, go look. This was before, the day before 9/11, to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Folks, it ain't because I'm so smart, but I know a whole lot of smart people. And I don't know any really smart person, left, right, or center, on national security that will tell you this president and his clones running for president of the United States have proposed anything that's made us any safer. As a matter of fact, they've made us considerably weaker. And our borders are part of that, sir. I don't know what your time is. I think I've gotten to the point I'm hurting business. Thank you all very, very much. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Answer your question with the question about your then what. I have
The then what is that if you separate them, let them have essentially their own states, like you do in Bosnia, where the Serbs are one area, etc. What happens is the desire of a Croat living with a Serb to kill the Croat evaporates because there's an overall settlement.
I meant, when you send all these kids to college, you give them money for tuition so that every American kid has a chance?
Yes.
Like my daughter?
Oh, I think then what the world begins to change. Then what happens is you see America become competitive again. You can't, a kid in the year 2020 who doesn't have a college degree doesn't have a chance of making it to the middle class unless they're...
It does, but 75% of the clinical psychologists can't get into fellowships through our school systems.
Oh,
so then what?
Oh, well, by the way...
They're trying to treat the veterans, but they can't...
No, well, but then what? Well, okay, I see what you're saying.
So then what?
No, there's a lot of then whats. There's a then whats in terms of... In terms of keeping a commitment to the veterans coming home, we should be expanding the hospital, not reducing them.
Trying to help them on the other side.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it's a big deal. That's going to be $1 trillion requirement because these kids are, as you know, more of these kids coming home with traumatic brain injury than they were since World War II. So, no, then we'll be able, at least we'll have the people to do it.
The good thing is it's job security, but the bad thing is shouldn't have that job security to help our kids.
Well, we're going to change that piece. What do you want?
Where's Jill?
Oh, man. You made the front page. Yeah. You're making me famous, man.
30 years as a journalist at the Courier.
That's right. You got it done.
And finally I got on the front page.
Jill is coming out Friday. You met my Jill. You said, where's Jill?
Yeah.
She's coming out Friday. She's teaching.
At the boat house, I said, I love you. And she said, you're too late. I got him. I also know that you proposed to her 5 times before she accepted.
That's exactly right. That's the God's truth. Well, thank you.
I've known H.R. Gross
John Kerry, Bob Case, Harold Stassen,
My Lord.
Charles Grassley.
You're kidding me.
And I don't admire Grassley.
He's not a bad guy now.
No, he's on the madam's list.
Yeah. Oh, is he really?
Yes, sir.
You're kidding me.
Bob Case told me that. Poor Barbara.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Sir, I'd like to, I don't expect you to address it now, but I'd like to hear you expound sometime on the financial problems that we're having with China and how we got there. But I don't expect you to have an answer.
I can
now.
do it in 1 minute.
All right.
We got there, they're financing our tax cut in the war. Here's what happens. We don't have the money, so we borrow it. What we do is we go and put out what they call a treasury offer. And we say, come buy a treasury bill, just like you buy a bond to lend me money. We owe them almost $1 trillion because they are financing the tax cuts for the wealthy rather than us just going further in debt with it, and they're financing the war. That's why they got us by the short hairs right now.
And when you go back to Iraq, tell the boys that the heartland of America, good old Iowa, supports you, okay?
I do tell them. That's the reason I go back.
Marine in Vietnam.
Number 5. All right, buddy. You know.
Yeah,
You know.
I know.
You know.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I want to know about your health care plan. You have, can I get on your internet?
Yes, you can, but I can tell you that, first of all, I support universal health care. I think we should have it, and I think it comes in 3 stages. And the way to do it is start off right away and make sure we provide health care for children in catastrophic to build a consensus in this country, because the real problem is going to be taking on those insurance companies. Because they're going to be the ones, you're going to have Harry and Louise. Remember those ads with Harry and Louise out there saying, this is awful what the Democrats are proposing. And so the second thing is you got to provide for, I think everyone should essentially be able to be, from age 1 on, essentially have the same kind of coverage you have in Medicare. It should be just universal across the board. We can afford to do that.
I know young people. I just had a young man paint my house. He did a beautiful job. He has no health care.
None.
He's 42 years old, and he says, it costs me
He can't afford it.
$500 a month. He said, there's no way.
He can't afford it. He can't afford it.
Unless you go to work for a company,
You got it.
people are lost.
That's why we got to get them immediately coverage for the big stuff. You could do that quickly. Said anything, God forbid he fell off the ladder and were paralyzed, it would cover it. As opposed to, thank you.
Don't you remember Swift Boat?
Sure.
Our heroes?
I do.
What do we do with our heroes?
Well, what we do with our heroes is we make sure we let you.
John Kerry.
Yeah.
Isn't that a crime?
It was a crime what was done to John. This is your book. I'm not going to steal it on you.
You haven't read what he wrote.
Pardon me? You want me to sign it?
No, I don't want to. I'll see you at Barnes & Noble for that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. You okay? All right, I will reread this when I walk out, okay?
Can I get a picture with you quick?
No, I don't take pictures of beautiful women. Not at all. Of course, I'd be delighted
Well,
to.
thank you.
What's your name?
Carrie. I gotta fix it. I don't know. Oh, sometimes it turns off.
You call Bob Dole a decent and honorable
There you
man.
go, quick.
I did, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You remember Greg Wilson that was in your
Oh, yes,
office?
yeah.
I'm from Tumble originally.
Yeah.
And he was down there and we worked together. And we put him in a balloon and flew him across Waterloo County.
Oh, did you really?
Tom Harkins signed on.
Is that right? Well, that's good use of his time.
Where is he now?
I haven't seen him in a long, long time.
Sign off my book,
I
please.
sure can.
It's right on this page, which you like.
Okay. Let me. How do you spell your first name?
Safet. S-A-F-E-T.
S-A?
F-E-T. Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I will pass to friends too. You guys did a good job over there in downtown.
After
29 is it today?
Yes, it's 29.
my wife
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you. Hi.
I'm going to get to your book signing, so I brought my book with me.
Sure, I'll be delighted. To you, Jane?
Yes.
we actually had Governor
booth. There was no way out for you. I apologize. It's like being in the first pew in church. How can I leave, huh?
I know.
Oh, thank you.
I have a concern. We wrote in here that there's a nursing shortage.
Yes.
Let me tell you, there's not a nursing shortage. There's a shortage of nurses in nursing.
That's a good way of putting it.
If you could find a way, you need to find a way to entice those nurses back into nursing, not to get new ones. There's plenty of new ones, let me tell you.
Do you have a card or a name I could contact you? Because I'm being told both things.
Email address.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Because I'm being told both. Both the absolute number as well as nurses leaving nursing.
They're leaving at a far greater rate than...
That's true. That's true. And and you know the reason I'm told they're leaving from nurses, because I go around to the hospitals and meet with the nurses. They say the main reason they're leaving is their increased responsibility, the number of rooms they have to take care of, et cetera. They're worried they're going to make a giant mistake.
Exactly.
And that's not, I mean, they are concerned about money, benefits, but that's the big thing.
And I'm a travel nurse, so I just go from one hospital to the other, and I'm one step ahead of...
Well, good. I'd love to talk to you. Would you write down a number I can call you on? Or, hey, Pat, how are you?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm well. Better for seeing you, kid. All right, because I'd love to have a woman named, a really smart person runs my staff, a lawyer on my staff, handles this issue for me. Her name is Terrell. Maybe she could call you, just have a 5-minute conversation. Okay? Good, well, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you. And by the way, having spent 7 months in the hospital with 2 cranial aneurysms and an embolism, if there are any angels in heaven, they're all nurses. They ain't docs. They're nurses. They're nurses. You think I'm joking? I'm not.
I know, because I'm taking care of you.
Oh, I'm fine, and you?
Great to see you.
Likewise. Good to see you this afternoon, too. I bought your book and didn't want it to end, and I got your son Hunter to sign it, too.
Oh, is that right? Well,
yeah,
great.
He was at the office. So.
Great. Well, thanks, Pat.
All right.
Need any help with your biceps, buddy?
Yeah.
You're looking good, man.
I just got
You're
fixed.
looking good.
Not bad for a John Deere retiree,
I tell
Almost
you,
3 years.
You're kidding me. I tell you, man.
But we need to get these corporations that quit building companies overseas and shut them down here. Ford, I just seen in the paper.
Oh yeah,
Ford wants to put a company in China.
That's right.
And shut down.
That's exactly right.
Plants here. What's wrong with the picture here?
What's wrong with the picture is
Either
the
in Dire
greed.
Strait or it's big money.
That's
Good luck to you.
Thank you, pal.
Okay.
Keep the faith.
All right.
Keep the faith. Mom, again, hope I didn't embarrass you introducing you again.
No, I'm getting used to it. But the one thing I am bothered by, and I want to tell you this, it's Democrats and Republicans. I'm interested in your values. I want to know what your values are. But where you got them, whether it was from your father, whether you got them through reading or from your church, I don't think that matters.
Right.
And I think there's too many politicians, both sides, wearing their religion on their sleeve, whether they believe in God or they don't, is brought up too much, and it bothers me.
Well, it does me too. If you notice, you don't hear me talking about God or my religion.
Yeah.
That's right.
But there are Democrats and Republicans who are doing that a lot. And
you know, I was taught in my religion, be wary of the Pharisees. They're the ones to worry about.
Right.
The one who tells you about their religion and tell you about how much they believe.
Right. And it bothers me because I think it's becoming rampant. I think both sides are using this a lot.
Well, I don't disagree with you. And the press is now trying to ask us all about those issues as well.
But values are important. I am interested in your values.
I agree with you.
Thanks
Good
for
question,
answering.
bud.
I like the way you answer the question.
Thank you,
You
buddy.
don't beat around the bush. I love it.
Thank you, bud.
Yep.
Thank you.
How you doing, Joe?
Hi, buddy. How you doing? Good
Pretty
to see you.
Good
How
seeing
you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. Hey, can you...
I'd be
sign
delighted.
again?
I'd be delighted. So you want it to you? How do you? Is it B?
Ruth.
But that looked like a B. I thought it was Ruthie. I was gonna say.
I didn't sign that.
Okay, I thought, my Lord, she changed her name on me.
Senator Biden returns to Iowa on Thursday for a 4-day campaign swing.